The terms are final, and we expect full compliance immediately. He says he will double the price if you sign now.
Jade had been invisible her whole life. But invisibility, in the right room, can be the most dangerous weapon in the world. Raised in a Detroit group home after her parents were deported when she was 6. Aged out of foster care at 18 with a garbage bag of clothes and $40. $40. That's what her entire childhood was worth to the system, but what she built from that $40, nobody saw coming. Worked double shifts at 3 different restaurants just to afford a room she shared with 2 strangers. She had no degree, no family, no connections, but she had one thing nobody could take. She had learned Mandarin, alone. Free apps on a cracked phone screen every night for 4 years, because she believed languages were the one door nobody could lock against a poor girl. Nobody knew that about her. To the guests at the Harrington Grand, she was just the quiet waitress who refilled water glasses without being asked. Until the night a billionaire's empire was about to be stolen, one mistranslated sentence at a time. Jade Collins had never once called in sick, not when her feet bled through her work shoes, not when she caught pneumonia in February and served soup to strangers while her own hands shook, not when her landlord raised the rent by $200 and she had to pick up a 4th shift just to stay in a room barely big enough to hold a bed and a dream. She was 26 years old and had been working since she was 15. The Harrington Grand was one of Chicago's most expensive hotels. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, guests who never looked at the staff when they spoke. Jade had worked there for 3 years, invisible by design, efficient by necessity. She cleared plates no one thanked her for. She refilled glasses no one acknowledged. She smiled at people who looked straight through her. But every night, after her double shift ended, Jade went home and opened her phone. Not to scroll, not to watch videos. She opened her Mandarin lessons, 4 years of it, self-taught, no tutor, no class, no certificate, just a cracked screen, free audio files, and a stubborn belief that one language could change the entire direction of a life. Her supervisor, Karen, had laughed when she mentioned it once. "Jade, honey, you're a waitress. What are you going to do? Translate egg rolls?" Jade smiled, said nothing, because silence is just preparation wearing a disguise, and she had been preparing for a very long time. Jade had smiled and said nothing. She had learned early that the quietest people in the room were usually the most dangerous ones to underestimate. She didn't know it yet, but in 72 hours, inside the Harrington Grand's private dining room, everything she had quietly built in the dark was about to step into the light. He arrived on a Tuesday. No announcement, no convoy, just a black SUV that pulled up quietly to the side entrance, the kind of quiet that only very powerful people could afford. Richard Caldwell was 53 years old and worth $4.2 billion. He had built his fortune in manufacturing, steel plants, logistics contracts, supply chain empires that stretched across 3 continents. He was not the kind of man who made mistakes. He was not the kind of man who trusted easily, which was exactly why he had brought his own translator. Daniel Marsh had translated for senators, for CEOs, for a former Secretary of State. He had never once been caught, until tonight. Daniel Marsh was polished, Ivy League, spoke Mandarin with a Beijing accent he had perfected over 10 years. He wore a suit that cost more than Jade's monthly rent and carried himself like a man who knew his value to the room. He had translated for senators, for CEOs, for a former Secretary of State. The meeting was with Wei Chen, a Chinese infrastructure mogul whose partnership could unlock a $600 million expansion into Southeast Asia for Caldwell Industries. Private dinner, Harrington Grand, table for 4. Jade was assigned to the room. She noticed Daniel Marsh the moment he walked in. Something about the way he smiled, wide and fast, like a man performing confidence rather than carrying it. She had seen that smile before, in the group home, on people who said one thing to your face and did another behind your back. She recognized it immediately. She had seen that smile before, in the group home, on the social workers who said one thing to your face and wrote something different in their reports. She said nothing. She filled the water glasses. She disappeared into the walls the way she always did. The dinner began at 7. Wei Chen spoke warmly, carefully, in Mandarin, the kind of measured language that serious businessmen use when real money is on the table. Daniel Marsh smiled and translated. Jade stood near the service door, perfectly still, and understood every single word. $600 million was sitting on that table, and only one person in that room knew it was already being stolen. She was holding a water pitcher. What Daniel Marsh told Richard Caldwell and what Wei Chen had actually said were not the same thing, not even close. Jade's hands were steady. That surprised her, because her mind was racing. She stood at the service station, a water pitcher in her hand, close enough to hear everything, invisible enough that no one thought to lower their voices. Wei Chen was speaking again, slower this time, more deliberate. His Mandarin was formal, precise, the language of a man laying out exact terms. He said, "We require full operational control of the Eastern Distribution Network for the first 3 years. This is not negotiable. If Mr. Caldwell cannot agree to this, there is no partnership." Daniel Marsh turned to Richard Caldwell, straightened his cuffs, and said, "Mr. Wei says he is flexible on the control structure and open to a shared governance model." "Stop. Did you catch that?" Wei Chen said non-negotiable. Daniel Marsh told the billionaire he was flexible. That one word, flexible, was about to cost Richard Caldwell everything. He's very optimistic about moving forward. Jade set down the pitcher quietly. Her heart was hammering. Her palms were cold. She was a waitress, a 26-year-old girl from a Detroit group home with no degree, no title, no business being in this conversation. Every single thing in her life had taught her to be small, to be quiet, to disappear. But some moments don't give you the option of walking away. This was one of them. Every practical instinct she had told her to stay in her lane. Refill the glasses, clear the plates, go home. But Richard Caldwell was nodding, smiling, reaching across the table to shake Wei Chen's hand on terms that didn't exist. And Wei Chen, who believed the terms had just been firmly stated and acknowledged, was shaking it. Whatever contract followed that handshake would collapse the moment the real terms surfaced. Caldwell would look like he had negotiated in bad faith. Wei Chen would feel deceived. A $600 million deal, and the reputation of a man who had built an empire on his word, would be destroyed. Jade looked at the door. Then she looked at Richard Caldwell. Then she did the thing that every instinct told her not to do. She stepped forward. "Excuse me, Mr. Caldwell." The entire room stopped breathing. Daniel Marsh turned slowly. And for the first time that evening, the most powerful person at that table wasn't the billionaire. It was the girl in the apron. The entire table went silent. Daniel Marsh turned slowly. His eyes found hers, and something dark moved behind them. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding." The silence lasted 4 full seconds. Daniel Marsh laughed first. It was the kind of laugh designed to shrink a person, sharp, dismissive, aimed. "She's a waitress," he said, turning back to the table like Jade had already disappeared. "I apologize, gentlemen. Staff sometimes. What misunderstanding?" It was Richard Caldwell who spoke. His voice was quiet, the voice of a man who had not built a $4.2 billion empire by ignoring details. Jade stood straight. She had spent 26 years being invisible. She had spent 4 years preparing for a moment she never thought would come. Her voice did not shake. Mr. Wei stated that full operational control of the Eastern Distribution Network for the first 3 years is a non-negotiable condition of the partnership. He said that if you cannot agree to that specific term, there is no deal. She paused. "That is not what was communicated to you." The table was stone silent. Wei Chen looked at Jade, then at Daniel Marsh, then back at Jade. He spoke in Mandarin, slow, careful, one sentence. Jade translated without hesitation. "He is asking if you understood his actual terms, Mr. Caldwell, or only the ones you were given." Richard Caldwell turned to Daniel Marsh. Daniel Marsh's polished exterior cracked, just slightly, just enough. "She doesn't know what she's talking about. She's a—" "Say waitress one more time," Caldwell said quietly, "and you'll be looking for work tonight." He looked at Wei Chen, then at Jade. "Would you sit down, please?" Weeks later, the story circulated quietly through Chicago's business circles, the kind of story that gets told in boardrooms and hushed over expensive dinners, how a $600 million deal had almost been stolen by the man hired to protect it, how it had been saved by a waitress who taught herself Mandarin on a cracked phone screen in a room she shared with two strangers. Daniel Marsh was dismissed that same evening. Richard Caldwell did not press charges, but he made 3 phone calls the following morning. By afternoon, every major firm in the city knew Daniel Marsh's name for all the wrong reasons. Wei Chen's team later confirmed what Jade had translated was flawless. More than flawless. She had caught a cultural nuance in Wei Chen's phrasing that even some native speakers would have missed. Richard Caldwell sent a car to the Harrington Grand the next morning with a letter and a number to call. Jade almost didn't call. She almost talked herself out of it the way she had talked herself out of every good thing that had ever approached her, convincing herself it wasn't real, that people like her didn't get phone calls like this, that the car was probably for someone else. But she called. 18 months later, Jade Collins held the title of Director of International Communications at Caldwell Industries. She managed a team of 11. She traveled to Singapore, Shanghai, and Seoul. She wore clothes that fit and slept in a bed that was only hers. She never forgot where she came from. On the wall of her office, above a desk that overlooked the Chicago skyline, she kept one thing from her old life: a photograph of a cracked phone screen taken the night she completed her first Mandarin lesson. A reminder of what 4 years of quiet, unseen work in a small room looked like when it finally stepped into the light. Richard Caldwell told the story at a shareholders' meeting once. He ended it with one line: "The most expensive mistake you can make in business and in life is to confuse a person's position with their potential." Jade had heard him say it. She smiled and said nothing. She had learned that a long time ago.